Well, we've had Mark Carney's speech tell us our military has grown and we're just getting things going now. They're telling you Canada's military recruitment is at a 30-year high. 30 years. Let that sink in. Because if that's actually true, if Canada has suddenly figured out how to bring tens of thousands of people back into uniform at record levels, then that's a massive national turnaround story. That's a government success story. We should all be celebrating. There should be fireworks, I think. Somebody get the fireworks out. That's something worth celebrating. Whew. Wow, 30 years. But there's a problem with all of that. When you actually look at the numbers, when you zoom out even just a few years, when you strip away the political framing and just ask a very simple question, compared to what? Well, that kind of ruins the government success story. This doesn't look like a historical surge anymore when you zoom out. It looks like a recovery more than anything else. A recovery from a collapse so bad the government itself called it a death spiral years ago. And that, my friends, changes the whole thing. Let's tap into the truth.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things for your Tuesday afternoon. I hope you've had a great day so far. My name is Chris Baker. Don't forget to like, subscribe, join the conversation. Let's start with what was actually said. First, Prime Minister Mark Carney over the weekend points to military recruitment as a win, and a big one. We've catalyzed upon catalyzing. Okay, I'll stop saying that. Then today, Defense Minister David McGuinty doubles down and says this: more than 7,000 new members joined the Canadian Armed Forces in the past year. Over 44,000 applications received, up 62%. And this, of course, is the headline, a 30-year high. Good for us. On the surface, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds incredible, in fact. 7,000 recruits? Oh, that's good. 44,000 people applied? Kind of a weird ratio of turndowns, but that's okay. 30-year high? Yeah, okay. Well, if you're just casually watching the news, which unfortunately most Canadians, especially Liberals, are, you're thinking, wow, way to go, Marcus PW7 Carney. Maybe things are finally turning around in this country. And look, I'm not here to tell you that more Canadians signing up to serve is a bad thing. I actually think that's a great thing. It's not a bad thing whatsoever. That part is generally a positive. But we need to separate two things that are being blended together here and being blended together on purpose. There's a positive trend and a politically framed narrative that they are using that trend for. Because those are not always the same thing, are they? In fact, they can be quite different in context versus reality. So let's rewind just a little, shall we? Not the episode, just hold it there, because this didn't start from a position of strength at all. Under former Defense Minister Bill Blair, the Canadian Armed Forces wasn't just struggling with recruitment, it was tanking. In fact, at the time, they described it as a death spiral, as I said earlier. It was headed way down. That's not my words. That's just the fact. It's in fact Liberal words. The death spiral meant a couple of things here. It meant that more people were leaving than joining the Canadian Armed Forces. Critical shortages were across multiple trades and actually still are, even with these new recruits. And units were under strength. Deployments were strained, and morale issues were across the board. And a recruitment system so slow that people were literally giving up before they ever actually got into the Canadian Armed Forces. We're talking processing times of 6 months, sometimes a year, just to get through the pipeline. So think about that for a second. 6 months to a year just to get through the... How are you going to ever become part of the CAF? If you fall that far behind, if your baseline drops that low, then even a rebound back to normal starts to look like an extraordinary growth period for the CAF. That's the first piece of context you are not getting in all of the headlines from David McGuinty or from Mark Carney right now, or even from our major news outlets that are just simply reporting the 7,000 number. Now let's talk about that 7,000 number, shall we? Because this is actually where things are getting really important to especially provide context around. The Canadian Armed Forces has always needed somewhere in the range of about 6,000 to 8,000 recruits per year just to stay even, not grow. 7,000, I don't know if you've noticed, is right in between those two numbers. That's just to not grow and not expand, but to stay the same. Just maintain, replace retirees, replace people leaving, keep the machine running. So when you hear that 7,000 recruits were put into the Canadian Armed Forces last year, that's actually not a surge. That's pretty normal. It's actually stabilization of the death spiral. That's about it. It's plugging the hole. That's getting back to where we should have stayed, where we should have been all along. It's not a revolutionary increase in military joining because of Mark Carney. And that's a very different story than what's being told to us, isn't it? Now, again, they're not saying it in those words because they can't. So instead, it's being implied, and that's the key here. So if we talk about the big flashy number, 44,000 applications, up 62%, that also sounds massive, doesn't it? But again, the truth just gets in your way, Mark Carney, doesn't it? Because here's what they're not saying. Applications are not recruits. They never have been, never will be, and a huge percentage of applicants don't meet medical criteria right out of the gate. They don't meet medical requirements at all the moment they sign the application. Then there's those that don't pass the background checks, those that don't complete the application process itself, or simply drop out because the system takes too bloody long. Those are all counted as applications, even applications started and not finished. So yes, applications going up is a good signal overall in the end. It means interest seems to be increasing in joining the Canadian Armed Forces, but it does not mean that 44,000 Canadians are about to join our military. It just doesn't work that way. That's not at all the case, and that's why it was 7,000 to a 46,000 number. It's a terrible ratio, and it definitely does not mean the recruitment crisis is solved. In fact, that ratio is so piss poor compared to other countries that we really haven't solved it yet. So let's get to the headline, shall we? The one designed to stick with you, that 30-year high. Everybody just wants to shout it out to the rooftops. But this is where you have to be very, very careful, which, of course, the government is not, because this is where technically true, by quote unquote, can drift into strategically misleading. Instead, that claim is almost certainly tied to the applications themselves, not fully processed recruits, because again, every year it's 6,000 to 8,000, and it's being compared against a recent baseline that was historically extremely weak. Think death spiral. So yes, if applications cratered over the past few years and now they bounce back sharply, guess what that creates? A huge bounce, perhaps a record bounce, but only to eliminate what we lost. You can hit a 30-year high in a very specific category, but that does not mean that the military is stronger than it's been in 30 years. It certainly doesn't mean that recruitment systems are fully fixed and operating efficiently when you have 7,000 in and 46,000 applying, and it definitely doesn't mean that Canada defense capacity has suddenly been transformed in the last year by Mark Carney. It means one thing and one thing only, that's at least a positive, and that is that interest has at least rebounded in becoming part of the CAF. It is a positive, but that's it. It is not an increase or growth or 30-year record growth in the CAF whatsoever. And here's the part that actually matters. Why are these numbers improving? Well, is that Mark Carney? Is that the Liberal government? Is this just random? I don't think it's necessarily random. I do think it might have some policy-driven moments to it. The government has made changes to the military. At least they say they have. They increased the military pay. That should get people thinking a little bit. They relaxed certain medical requirements to get in. They tried to speed up processing a little bit. So what you're seeing right now is kind of an influx of people who were on the sidelines hemming and hawing about it and then hear these few policy changes and decide to apply. It is the result of those adjustments, which, again, like I say, is a good thing. But it also means something very important. It's not organic growth. It's because of incentives being thrown at people. It is an engineered recovery, which we needed. So don't get me wrong. An engineered recovery was always going to have to prove itself over time, though. Because if those fixes don't hold, if it's not a fair pay, if it's not that people are treated better in the CAF, if retention doesn't improve, if the system slows down again, then these gains were just temporary gains on political policy to get elected. They can disappear just as quickly as they showed up. And that's an important part for all of us to remember as part of this episode. Even David McGuinty admitted something I thought was pretty critical in his presser. The military is still short in key areas. The system wasn't fixed, and I thought it was good of him to actually admit that, because if it was Mark Carney, he would say we fixed everything already. Marine technicians, for example, weapons engineering technicians, specialized roles that are absolutely essential to actual operational capacity. And again, that's part of things that most of us miss. You can increase total recruitment numbers all you want, but still be functionally very weak as an armed forces. And that's kind of where we sit right now, because modern militaries don't run on headcount alone. You can't just increase the numbers and say everything's fixed. We have a very strong military base. They run on specialization, and if those roles remain understaffed or not staffed at all, then the system itself is still under very strong strain, perhaps even more than it was before, carrying the extra people but not the extra services. And this is where the story becomes bigger than just military recruitment as a whole. It's the part they don't want to tell you, because you've seen this pattern before, Canada. Take a problem, right? Let it get worse. Let it fall below normal, then try to fix part of it, not all of it, part of it, but watch as the numbers bounce like crazy. Present the recovery as a huge breakthrough because you let it wane for so long. It's not unique to this issue. It's not just the military. It shows up in housing. It shows up in immigration. It shows up in basically every policy when this happens. Inflation narratives, doesn't matter. And now it's the military recruitment story that it's showing up in. The baseline quietly shifts, and suddenly back to normal becomes historic progress for our military. This is history in the making. Thank you, Mr. Carney. But it's only him selling it as Mr. Carney doing this. The reality is it was all a strategy to begin with. This is where we come back to something we've talked about before, haven't we? The old good faith measure. We don't seem to use that as a Liberal government because technically, yes, numbers are up. Yes, applications are higher. Yes, recruitment has improved to an extent. All of that is technically true. But in good faith, well, you would also say the following. We're recovering from a massive serious decline that was referred to by a government sitting as a death spiral. We're not fully out of the woods on that yet. We're stabilizing, not surging. And that distinction really does matter when you talk about national defense, because Canadians always deserve context when it comes to their safety and when it comes to their country, not just the headlines. 7,000 seems like a good number, but it's the normal number. 46,000 seems like a great number, but it's a bottoming out, shooting back up. Canada's military recruitment isn't collapsing anymore, and that's a good thing. I'll give you that. But it's only just improving, and it's filling holes that were created by the Liberal government over the last 11 years. It's not a 30-year success story like they're trying to sell it, but it is a bit of a comeback story, and those are not the same thing. The comeback story needs things to stay as good as they can be. Comeback means you still have something to prove. The comeback means you haven't won yet. You're going from worst to whatever it's going to be. But the only way you're first is if you win something. You still have ground to make up here, and you're not finished yet. And until we start talking about these issues in actual full context rather than the Mark Carney rhetoric, not just the parts that sound good, that make him look good, and showing B-roll headlines on the screen while he talks from his Liberati press, we're going to keep refusing recovery with results. And that's exactly why we do this show, because you didn't come here for the headlines, did you? You came here to talk about it, and you came here for the truth, and that is how you tap into the truth. So let's keep doing that together. Jump into those comments and talk about this military situation. Yes, there are some good things happening, but what are the things you're noticing that aren't happening? Have you had history with the military, the Canadian Armed Forces, that you can tell us about that maybe we don't know, that further extends what we're talking about here? Put that in the comments. Let's have the discussion, and we will see you tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning, at 6 a.m. Eastern Time for the morning edition of Tap the Maple here on Bakes on Things. Thanks, and have a great Tuesday night. We'll see you tomorrow.